At this point in the story, Billy's bull has been defeated and killed in a battle with the great black bull of the forest. Now Billy has followed the bull's instructions and is now on his journey to find his fortune. So let's continue. He traveled for 3 days and 3 nights until he came to a great house. When Billy asked the master of the house for work, the man said he needed someone to take his cows to pasture. But, warned the man, there are 3 giant brothers who come to steal the milk from the cows every day and kill the boy who's herding them. If you want to try, you can, but we won't fix your wages until you come back alive. Agreed then, said Billy. So the next morning he got up and drove the cows to the orchard. The morning passed quietly, but about midday, Billy heard 3 terrible roars that shook the apples from the trees, rattled the horns on the cows, and made the hair stand up on Billy's head. There stood a frightful giant with 3 heads. "You're too big for 1 bite and too small for 2, said the giant. "What will I do with you?" "I'll fight you," said Billy, swinging his stick 3 times over his head. With that, the stick changed into a sword and gave him the strength of 1,000 men. But the giant laughed at the size of Billy. "What way do you prefer to be killed?" he roared. "With a swing by the back or a cut of the sword?" With a swing by the back," said Billy. So they began to wrestle, and Billy lifted the giant clean off the ground. When the giant came down, he sank into the earth up to his armpits. "Spare me," bawled the giant. But with a sweep of his sword, Billy cut off the giant's 3 heads. It was evening by this time, so Billy drove the cows home. "Well," said the master, "this beats me. No herd boy has ever come back alive before." "Did you see anything in the orchard, Billy?" he asked. "Nothing worse than myself," said Billy. "What about my wages now?" "Well," said the master, "you'll hardly come out of the orchard alive tomorrow, so we'll wait until then." Next morning after breakfast, Billy drove the cows into the orchard again. He didn't hear anything unusual until about 12 o'clock. Then he heard 3 terrible roars, twice as loud as the day before, and in came a frightful giant with 6 heads. The giant raged at Billy for killing his brother and said he would make him pay. "But you're too big for 1 bite and too small for 2, shouted the giant. "What will I do with you?" "I'll fight you," said Billy, swinging his stick 3 times over his head and turning it into a sword that gave him the strength of 1,000 men. The giant laughed at the size of him and roared, "What way do you prefer to be killed, with a swing by the back or a cut of the sword?" "With a swing by the back," said Billy. They set to, and Billy lifted the giant clean off his feet. When the giant came down, he sank into the earth up to his armpits. "Spare me," he cried, but with a sweep of his sword, Billy cut off the giant's 6 heads. It was evening by this time, so Billy drove his cows home. If the master was surprised to see Billy come back the night before, he was 10 times more surprised now. "Did you see anything in the orchard today?" he asked. "Nothing worse than myself," said Billy. "And now, what about my wages?" "Never mind about your wages until tomorrow," said the master. I think you'll hardly come back alive again. Next morning after breakfast, Billy set off to the orchard with the cows. Sure enough, about the middle of the day, he heard 3 terrible roars, twice louder than the day before, and in came a giant with 12 heads. "You villain, you!" shouted the giant at Billy. "You killed my 2 brothers, and now I'll have my revenge. But you're too big for 1 bite, and too small for 2. What will I do with you?" "I'll fight you," said Billy, swinging the stick around his head 3 times and turning it into a sword that gave him the strength of 1,000 men. The giant laughed heartily at the size of him. "Which way do you prefer to be killed? With a swing by the back or a cut of the sword?" "With a swing by the back," said Billy. So they began to wrestle, and in it ended like the day before, with the giant dead. Billy cut off the giant's 12 heads in one sweep of his sword. Then he drove the cows home. The master was more surprised than ever to see Billy. He asked, "Did you see nothing in the orchard today?" "Nothing worse than myself," said Billy. "And now, what about my wages?" "You're a good lad, and I'll give you any wages you ask for in the future," said the master. The next morning the master told Billy that he was going to see a fight and that Billy must stay home and take care of the animals. "What fight?" asked Billy. "Why," said the master, "the king's daughter is going to be eaten by a dragon, if the greatest fighter in the land doesn't kill the dragon first. But if he's able to kill the dragon, he'll get to marry the princess." "That will be fine," said Billy. On the way to the orchard, Billy passed the people going to see the fight. "Aren't you coming?" they asked. "What would the likes of me be doing there?" Billy replied. But as soon as they were gone, Billy went back to the house, saddled and bridled the best black horse the master had, put on the best suit of clothes he could find, and, wearing his belt, he rode off to the fight. When Billy got to the castle, he saw the princess with the entire court around her. He thought he had never seen anyone so beautiful. The knight who was to fight the dragon was there too, walking up and down on the lawn, with 3 men carrying his sword, and everyone looking at him. But when the fiery dragon came up, with 12 heads on him, and every mouth spitting fire, and let out 12 roars, the knight ran away and hid. The princess asked if there was no one there to save her from the dragon. No one stirred. Then Billy stepped out of the crowd, swung his stick over his head 3 times, and went at the dragon with his sword. After a terrible fight, the dragon lay dead. Everyone gathered around to find out who the stranger was. Billy jumped on his horse. As he was getting away, the princess pulled off one of his shoes. The knight came out of hiding, cut off the heads of the dragon, and he brought them to the king, saying it was he in disguise who had killed the dragon. But when the princess tried the shoe on him, it didn't fit, and she said she would marry no one but the man whose foot was a perfect fit for the shoe. When Billy got home, he changed his clothes again, put the horse in the stable, and got the cattle home before the master returned. The king proclaimed that on a certain day the princess would try the shoe on all the men who came to the castle. When the day arrived, Billy was in the orchard with the cows, and a crowd passed by. The people stopped to ask Billy if he wasn't going to the castle. "What would the likes of me be doing there?" Billy replied. After the others were gone, an old man dressed in rags passed by. Billy stopped him to ask him to swap clothes. At first the old man thought Billy was making fun of him, but when he saw that Billy was serious, they swapped clothes. Only Billy kept his belt. Off to the castle went Billy. When he got there, he found all the young men in a great commotion trying on the shoe, but the shoe fit none of them. The princess was about to give up in despair, when a ragged-looking lad, who was Billy, elbowed his way through and asked, "Let me try it on. Maybe the shoe will fit me." The people laughed at the sight of him, but the princess called out, "Come and try." Billy went up amidst the laughter, and what would you have of it? The shoe fit as nicely as if it had been made for him. So the princess claimed Billy as her husband. Then Billy confessed that it was he who had killed the fiery dragon. And when Billy was dressed up in a fine silk suit, trimmed with gold and silver, everyone said that they had never seen such a handsome fellow. Billy and the princess were married. The wedding lasted 9 days, 9 hours, 9 minutes, 9 half minutes, and 9 quarter minutes, and they lived happy and well from that day to this. Here's Billy trying the shoe. And the princess. All the people. The end.